Karen took over my backyard for a wedding, so I flooded it with sewage. I'll never forget the morning I woke up to find my backyard had been completely transformed into the setting for a wedding. Picture this: a white runway leading from my koi pond to my barbecue, a floral arch placed right over my grill, and a full orchestra of violins playing instrumental Ed Sheeran. But the worst part? 60 strangers were sipping champagne on my lawn like they were at a five-star wedding venue. And who do I see at the center of it all? The HOA president, Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of entitlement, barking orders like she was in charge of the whole neighborhood. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was only 9 a.m., and there I was, in my pajamas, completely blindsided by the audacity of it all. 2 weeks earlier, Karen had knocked on my door, smiling like she was some friendly neighbor, asking if she could borrow my backyard for her niece's wedding. When I told her that my yard was private property, she just brushed me off with a, "Well, it's kind of part of the neighborhood, don't you think?" I thought it was a joke and never imagined she'd try anything like this. But now I was staring at an all-out wedding party happening in the middle of my private space. Guests were setting up folding chairs. The lawn was decorated with glittering signs pointing to "The Wedding This Way," signs literally attached to my mailbox. And my trash bins had been moved. And the worst offense? They had placed a massive floral arch directly above my grill, like it was part of the wedding decorations. I stood there, shocked and furious, while my dog was going crazy inside, and my wife looked at me, baffled, asking, "Are we hosting a wedding today?" I couldn't believe this was happening. I walked outside, recording everything with my phone. Karen, of course, was at the center of it all, directing the vendors like she was Spielberg. When she saw me, she didn't flinch. Instead, she waved at me smugly and said, "Don't worry, we'll be done by 3. Done by 3? She had turned my yard into a wedding venue without even asking. And now, just because they were supposed to leave at 3, it somehow made it okay. I asked her if they had a permit. She laughed in my face and said, "It's just a family gathering. We cleared it with the board." Spoiler alert, there was no clearance, and the board had no idea this was happening. That's when Karen pulled out her favorite line. "You should be honored to host something this beautiful." Honored? I was supposed to thank her for using my yard without my permission? This was insane. I called the police, but Karen had already called them too, claiming that she had rented my yard for a private event. She even told them she had a signed agreement. But that was all a lie. The dispatcher sounded confused, but promised someone would be out in an hour. I stood there, recording more of the madness while tuxedo-clad guests asked if I was with catering. One woman even asked me where the hors d'oeuvres were. I pointed her toward the road and said, "Probably 2 miles that way." My wife, bless her, was fuming. She kept muttering, "This is not happening." Meanwhile, a guy was setting up a camera tripod by our hammock, and someone else was tossing rose petals across the deck like he was starring in a perfume commercial. That's when I knew I had to do something. This wasn't just an inconvenience anymore. It was a violation of my rights. I didn't storm out in rage. No, I smiled. Something about Karen's smug face, her assumption that I was just some passive homeowner, had me feeling like I had a plan. So, I went to the basement, not for any weapon, but for something much more unexpected. My old submersible sump pump. I connected it to a garden hose and an old drainage line that had been blocked up after last week's storm. I had a perfect revenge setup. I waited for the right moment. I let the wedding continue. I watched as the violinist started tuning again, and Karen stood by the altar, chatting about how generous the community was. When they called, "Places, everyone," I flipped the switch. The pump roared to life, and I could feel the surge of dirty runoff water silently creeping beneath my hedges, heading straight toward the wedding setup. The water was the color of coffee, the smell of rotten leaves. Minutes later, as the bride walked down the aisle, the ground beneath her heels started to turn into a slick, muddy mess. The first bubble popped near the altar, and the bride froze, looking down at the hem of her dress, which was now covered in sludge. The flower girl slipped, spilling half her petals. Karen tried to maintain control, but the wedding quickly descended into chaos. Guests screamed, the violinist stopped playing, and people scrambled to grab folding chairs and escape the now flooded yard. Karen's smug expression evaporated as she stepped into the mud. She started shouting at the guests, trying to control the scene, but it was too late. The wedding was ruined. I walked outside, stood on my back porch, and watched the chaos unfold. Karen stormed toward me, screaming about how I had ruined the wedding. But I calmly pointed to the sign she had taped to my mailbox, my property deed, and the security cameras that showed her unlocking my gate with bolt cutters. She had no case. She tried to backpedal, claiming it was all just a misunderstanding, but no one was buying it. Guests started leaving, some yelling at her for not renting a real venue. The bride was sobbing in the mud. The groom looked like he was regretting the whole thing. I didn't gloat, but I knew this was just the beginning for Karen. The HOA quickly got involved, with Karen filing absurd complaints against me for things like improper drainage and aggressive behavior. But I had evidence. I fought back with logic and proof, and when I showed up at the next HOA meeting, the tables had turned. I presented unedited video footage showing Karen's lies, her breaking into my yard, and even her directing the guests onto my property without permission. In the end, Karen was removed from her position as HOA president. It was a sweet victory, but Karen wasn't done. She started launching a retaliation campaign with fake complaints and anonymous notes accusing me of everything from unsafe landscaping to offensive odors. But every attempt was futile, and it only made her look more desperate. 3 days after Karen was ousted from the HOA, she put her house up for sale. Whether it was the embarrassment or the loss of power, I don't know, but it was clear that her reign was over. The neighborhood breathed a sigh of relief, but the real twist came when the new owners of Karen's house arrived. They were friendly, normal people who handed me homemade cookies as a gesture of goodwill. It felt like the end of an era. Karen's fortress of entitlement was gone, and the community had finally healed. No more weddings without permission, no more entitlement. Just peace. So, what do you think? Did I go too far? Was my revenge justified? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Would you have done the same or handled it differently? I'm curious to hear your opinions on this one.